Good morning. Good morning. Go ahead and knock this lecture out real quick. This is lecture 2 for week 1, right? Lecture 2 for week 1. I hope you got you gone through the first video of lecture video, and then hopefully you've watched at least that video, and then you're getting ready to watch the film. All right. So let me go ahead and lecture. So in the first lecture, I wanted us to get the big frame, the screen, and how the screen lies, right? In this lecture, we're going to look more closely at the lie itself. What does the lie look like? How does it work? Why does the lie even last, right? And why does the lie still keep going on even today, right? In 2026. Because one thing about racism is that it doesn't always come in the face of swastikas or wearing a hood. Sometimes it comes as a joke, right? Sometimes it comes as a funny thing to do at Halloween, right? Maybe even it's a compliment, like you are so strong, right? But oftentimes what it means is things like you are, I wish I could explain why I'm so different than you, or things like that, right? That's why stereotypes are slippery, right? I mean, if they were only ugly, they would be easier to reject, right? But sometimes stereotypes have a nice, sweet coating around it, right? The mammy, for instance, right, is loving. The Uncle Tom is faithful. The magical Negro is a smart, wise person. The strong black woman is powerful, admirable, right? The comic sidekick is funny. The athletic black body is so talented, right? The problem is not that like those adjectives, love, humor, faithfulness, is bad. The problem is that stereotypes turns human traits into racial categories. It's almost like this is what you are here to do, right? Shut up and dribble kind of stuff, right? You are here to entertain. You are here to absorb what you're being given, right? You are here to be useful to somebody else's plot or somebody else's story, right? So let's start with the mammy, right? The mammy is one of the most persistent images in American culture. It's generally a woman. It's always a woman. She's generally older, maybe a larger woman, almost desexualized, right? She doesn't have sex, right? She's loyal and she's a domestic. She's often tied to taking care of people, right? And to notice what it does, it links domestic labor into intimacy. It turns exploitation into affection. It suggests that black women weren't forced into slavery because of racial violence. No, they don't want to talk that part, but it's for the caring of others, especially historically the caring of plantation houses, right? If you follow that image, you don't have to really get into the interiority, right? You don't have to ask in a movie what happens to her, who's in her family. You don't have to ask questions about what's her tired level, right? Her rage, right? That's what I mean by the theft, the stealing away of interior life, right? The mammy can love others, but others can't love her. She can work, but she can't dream. She can advise and take care, but she can't desire for herself, right? I mean, her existence is organized around somebody else's household, right? She exists for the pleasure of others, right? That's not humanity. That's usefulness, utility dressed up as affection, right? That's the mammy. The Uncle Tom has a complicated history, right? Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Time is not the same as the screen character, right? In Harriet Beecher Stowe, um, Tom, Uncle Tom is a morally serious figure, right? But in popular culture, it changed, right? Racial betrayal, servitude. Um, it's almost like the black man that smiles all the time, right? Chooses white approval, right, over black solidarity, a safe Negro, right? He doesn't threaten the racial order, hierarchy of things, right? Um, Now, we got to be careful, right? Because subservience is not all the time like violence, right? It can be. But oftentimes we know some black folk just have to kind of, they have, code switch, right? They have to live a double life, right? Silence is not always a consent, right? The Uncle Tom stereotype does something different. It presents a sort of a natural obedience. It makes black men acceptable only when they are harmless, right? It tells white audiences this is the kind of black man you get with, right? The one that don't ask you to change, that don't challenge you, right? And that transitions to the third one, right? The magical Negro, right? The magical Negro comes later in film. This character has wisdom, has spiritual depth, um, sometimes even has some kind of power, right? But don't have an independent life, right? They appear in order to save and guide and morally awaken on the screen a white friend or a white boss, right? This is wisdom extracted for Black life, used as a service for others, right? The character is often in film loved by the audience, but that love is conditional, right? That love is beloved, that character is beloved because they're useful, right? We need to think about that word useful, right? A stereotype is not always make black folk visible, right? It makes black people hyper visible in a narrow way, right? The black body is seen, but is always in labor, right? The black voice is heard, but it's more of entertainment, right? The black face is remembered, but it's comfortable, right? The black woman is strong, but others don't have to be because they put her. Black men can be funny, but not. They don't have emotions, right? Can be wise, but not complicated. Can be the black athlete is gifted, but not quite intellectual, right? Those are misseeing the humanity of others, right? And let me put it in language you might kind of understand better. A stereotype is like a bad algorithm, right? You click one thing one time, and now the system thinks it knows your entire soul. That's how algorithms work, right? You watch a cooking video, and now your feed thinks you're opening a restaurant or something, right? You watch one review of sneakers, right, or kicks, and now they're trying to sell you shoes that you can't even afford, right? Racism is kind of like that for real, except the algorithm is centuries old and people mistake it for truth. It takes a small distorted piece of image and build a whole world around it, right? And that's why the stereotype often precedes reason, right? It doesn't even use evidence, right? It kind of assumes that it already knows what they are seeing. And this is why it's dangerous in film and in broadly in popular culture. The officer sees a threat before the officer sees the child. The teacher sees attitude before it sees intelligence, right? The employer might see, risk before usefulness, right? You might see urban life before art, right? You might see, protest and agitation before asking, man, are they aggrieved, right? And so, that's how it plays out, right? So let's talk about caricature in film, right? Caricature, right? That's the exaggeration of features, right? In racist caricature, exaggeration becomes, important, right? Big lips, broken speech, childish movement, a sense of laziness and foolishness, hypersexuality, animal imagery, right? Criminality. These aren't random inventions, especially in cinema, right? They were designed to support a racial order, a sort of a algorithm, if you will. If I can continue to make black folk appear childish, then domination of black folk is more like supervision, right? If black folk can be portrayed as being lazy, then I can justify exploitation. It's economic exploitation, right? If black men are looked at as, I don't know, sexually dangerous, then clearly anti-black violence can be seen as justified again, right? When we look at black women, they're just endless. They can take on anything, right? Then the strong black woman, then we can take those women for granted, right? That's why the caricatures of women and the characters of black folk is really a history of excuse making, right? It advances a political need, right? The mammy, the Sambo, right? The Sambo excuses paternalism, right? The buck, right? Excuses violence with surveillance, right? The tragic mulatto, right? The light skin stereotype and caricature. The Uncle Time excuses sort of the desire for black obedience, right? And like we said before, these images are not like just dumb accidents. They're more like alibis, right? Cultural alibis. Now, so what does this have to do with your film work this week, right? I'd say everything. I think, when you watch the Oscar Michaud film Within Our Gates, you're not just watching an old movie. You're watching a sort of a counter image, right? Michaud is working in a world in which black folk have always already been defined by hostile images. So part of what he has to do is to tell a story, right? To clear space for a different type of scene, right? That's hard work. It's like trying to sing a new song, while somebody else's ugly song is in the speaker, right? And it's like that's kind of like the importance of satire as well, right? We'll deal with comedy a little bit later in the maybe a week 3 or 4, but satire can expose the logic of the stereotype by exaggerating the stereotype until it becomes just purely ridiculous, right? But satire is risky, right? Because if you got a smart audience, satire can liberate. But if you got a lazy audience, satire can play into it, right? So that's why I want you to watch Hollywood Shuffle or Bamboozled, right? They aren't merely trying to make people laugh, right? They're asking, why do you find this funny? What is it about your thirst of cultural images that makes this appreciative for you? But what if we push the stereotype hard to the audience have to confront the image and be like, oh shit, oh shoot, right? That makes sense, right? It's like, but I don't want you to be like, man, don't call them a mammy and that's a bad thing. I want you to do more in this class, right? What is it asking you to believe about the mammy? What does it hide, right? What do these images and caricatures cause you to kind of emote, right? Sympathy, laughter, disgust, right? Then ask who benefits if you get that emotion, right? That's good analysis, right? You look at the image and then you kind of make that up. So let's look at it this way. So let's say if you was to say something like, the magical Negro is a stereotype because the black character helps the white character. I mean, come on. Now, a better answer, because the magical Negro is a dangerous figure because the black character may appear powerful, but that powerful, though, is limited, right? That's a different thing. The wisdom, right? The, you know, the if you say something like the film honors, say, a black insight, right? But refuses interiority, right? That makes sense, right? Um, Now let me get a little bit into black women and these stereotypes because this is where students sometimes get a little lazy sometimes. I don't want you to do that, right? The Mammy, the Jezebel, Sapphire, Tragic Mulatto, right? They aren't separate necessarily from one another, right? Hollywood don't have a neat filing cabinet of stereotypes and caricatures, right? One image kind of desexualizes black women. Another one hypersexualizes black women. One makes black women nurturing. One makes them angry. And another one may make it tragic, right? It may make them comic, right? But it's the contradiction at play, right? It's not logical consistency. That's not what white supremacy does, right? And racialized violence does. It's not logic, right? If labor is needed, bring in the mammy. If sexual fantasy or blame it needs to be put on black families, well, we create Jezebels, right? Uh, um, the sapphire, appears to create conflict in families, right? The image, the sort of the meaning is to preserve the need for these images, right? I mean, think about it. We still debate, right, about whether black women, especially, are soft or vulnerable or complex or strong, right? Think about how quickly black women are sort of called difficult or ungrateful or sometimes too loud or too much. Y'all doing too much, right? That's cute. That's not just social media being messy, right? It's linked to a historic chain of caricatures and stereotypes, right? Social media can be messy, don't get me wrong, but it's a long history talking through new platforms, right? The old screen, as we said in lecture one, learned to lie, but now the lies are spread everywhere. The lies got Wi-Fi now, the lies on Netflix and Tubi and YouTube, right? The fear of the big black body still fears in American culture, right? The criminality, the sexual danger, the threat, right? In sports, the black body is still often body without mind, right? And policing the black body, as we know, is fear before evidence, right? That's why the representation within film is not just symbolism, but it helps shape what kind of responses are reasonable, right? It's where I like hip hop too, because hip hop creates a counter image, right? Hip hop takes the images that America fears and speaks from inside it, right? It is a sort of a woken satire. That doesn't mean it's innocent. Hip hop got its own issues of materialism and violence and gender inequality, performance stuff. I'm not trying to romanticize hip hop, but hip hop gave black and brown youth sort of space to put pressure on police to create a style, a hunger, ambition from the inside, as Du Bois would say, from inside to veil, right? So some say you might call this the ghetto. but many within the quote unquote ghetto calls it memory and survival, and that's different, right? These urban spaces that outsiders reduce to pathos, a pathology, creates a genius, right? Uh, what does Spock say? Out of the uh, cracked sidewalk of flowers born. I've got the phrase, right? Um, um, Black folk are looked at as the ones with the attitude, right? The comic relief in film. You're the best friend. Think of all the best friend movies, black and white best friend movies, right? In film, it's hard to find, like I said, the interiority, right? It's it's like the black character just pops up and provides what is needed, right? It's like narrative servitude, right? So that's why I want you to be looking for interior life, right? Interior life means the character has a world inside them, have contradictions, they have memories, they have families that they have to deal with, they have fear, right? Foolishness, right? But as well as tenderness, right? They're complex folk. They have a future that's not just controlled by someone else, right? But if I only have a black character that only exists to do one thing, to scare, to comfort, to entertain, to educate someone else's kids, then we got a problem, right? So the question for me is not just whether or not the character is positive or negative. The character is whether the character is allowed to be human, right? Right. I think about nowadays, right? You know how quickly black folk get turned into something else, right? A black athlete, for instance, is an argument about discipline, right? A black woman speaking firmly becomes a conversation about anger, and a mad black woman, right? Um, you know, hip hop is a conversation about crime, even though hip hop is about poetry and business strategy and humor and all that as well. But the old stereotypes don't always come looking like they do in Oscar Michaud 1926 film. It can show up, as Spike Lee says, it shows up in Tyler Perry films, right? And so maybe even a video, maybe even the stuff that we watch all the time. And that's why I wanted you to watch the video that I gave you on that I had you send, that I sent to you on Black Stereotypes, right? Because it is a warning label for modern viewing, right? The Mammy, the Uncle Tom, the Magical Negro, the Jezebel, the Sapphire, right? The Buck, right? Uh, uh, um, the Sambo, these strong and angry black women, um, you know, they they have resonance, right? They aren't just terms, right? They are traps. Your job is to see the trap before the film, before you step into the trap in the film, right? Don't be afraid of humor. It can be funny. So sometimes the best way to expose a stereotype is to laugh at how ridiculous it is, but don't fall into it. Don't sink and get drowned, because laughter has to know what it's doing. The joke needs to punch the stereotype in the face. That'll be good. If the joke puts the stereotypes in a new dress and a Gucci or some Louis, then we need to talk, right? So that's why I asked you some questions for this week. Now, not only about what a stereotype is, but what it teaches the audience to believe, right? So here's your charge. I gave you some words. Don't treat the terms as just as definitions only. I know you're going to be tempted to do that, but treat them as tools, right? Tools like a representation, right? Terms like stereotype, right? Is more like what is humanity being reduced to, right? Characters are asking you what features have been exaggerated and why are they being exaggerated, right? Blackface, who's doing the blackness and for what pleasure, for what outcome, right? The terms like interiority, right? What exists beyond the block, beyond the camera, right? Stuff like that, right? So I want you to, you know, I also want you to watch your own reaction to these stereotypes, not just this week, but going forward. But when do you laugh at stuff? When do you feel uncomfortable, right? When do you feel like the film is just this is doing too much, right? Or maybe it's boring, right? Maybe you might think Within Our Gates is boring, but sometimes boredom means you are trained to expect certain speeds, certain things that stimulate you, not but stimulate you in an emotive way and not a rational, right? So you don't have to like every film, right? But you have to ask what is your reaction is saying about the film and what is it avoiding, right? So let me just close this short video with this. A stereotype is not just a bad picture, it's a theory of a person, right? It says what that person is for, just like that algorithm, right? It says what that person is seeking. It says that black film at its best, I think, breaks the theory apart, right? It gives us contradiction where the stereotype is one of simplicity. I think it tries to give us grief. Black film gives us grief where the character wanted laughter, right? I like black film, and I think we should study black film because it gives us interior life where often America just wanted black folk to function in certain ways, right? So again, as you watch, Within Our Gates and Hollywood Shuffle, look for the old images, but don't let the old images control your viewing, right? Look at Sylvia Landry in Within Our Gates and watch how she moves through a world which people try to misguide and misread her, right? Maybe watch how violence becomes memory as well, right? Watch how the film demands that Black life be taken seriously, right? And I don't want you, remember, I don't want you to summarize in this stuff. Interpret. Bring me an argument. Bring me thought. Okay, can you do that for me? All right. Enjoy. All right. Wait. Let me say one more thing before I ask you to write. The easiest mistake is to treat stereotypes as simple vocabulary words. Don't just define Uncle Tom. Don't just define a mammy or a sapphire. Don't do that. And then think now the work is done. I mean, I need you to ask what those images accomplish, right? A stereotype is not just an image, it's a social order, it's a social instruction. It tells viewers how to remain, how to sort of be, like the mammy, for instance. It instructs what? Comfort, right? Protection, right? The coon instructs, right? Ridicule, right? Stuff like that. What does it instruct, right? What are we supposed to glean as we watch these folk, right? Does that make sense? All right. Call me if you need me. See how that works? Call me if you need me. Take care. Stay strong.